You know what it's like to actually purchase and operate a Blackwell chip, and it looks like the Saudis are going to be the next ones on the list here. With all the talk of national security concerns and export controls with China, is Saudi Arabia the right country to be next on the list?
No, I think, what's amazing to me right now, Joe, and all the things that you see right now in the House of Representatives with the Chip Roys talking about, bringing up the Muslim Brotherhood conspiracy theories again and Sharia law conspiracy theories and sort of the ridiculousness and pushing this hate, this Islamophobia. I find it amazing you're not going to get a whole lot of statements about what you're saying in the news. That I just heard the update in the news, by the way, for both of you. My heart rate went up, specifically with Paramount. And I can tell you why sometime if you ever ask me about that. I'm like, oh, my goodness, there's so much there. But I think what you're looking at with Saudi, I think people in the country, the grown-ups, realize that you have to have certain relationships globally. But I think those global relationships have to be mature. And I think when you're talking about Blackwell chips, or you're talking about AI, you're talking about technology transfer. My question is, what other technology transfer does Saudi Arabia have? For instance, haven't they just received surface-to-air missile systems from Russia? And when you're talking about real DoD decision makers, real adults in the room, which I think there's a lack of in this administration, I think what you have to consider is, regardless of the relationships you have to have for certain strategic goals or objectives, you have to look at the government itself, but you also have to look at what happens with something called FME, foreign material exploitation. And the fact is, if we're providing chips or F-35s, we're providing technology, advanced technologies, and the Russians are there also with their technologies, they can exploit what we have without us having insight into that. And I just wonder if anybody's looking at any of this in any way that doesn't actually have decisions just based on what Donald Trump wants, whether it's for his own business interest or whatnot. So I think that's the thing that gets people who've been in the actual defense business, who've been in Congress, who've had to make serious decisions, that even with the press conference, again, the news, the updates, it's unbelievable. Even with the press conference, our administration seems so decidedly unserious about what could happen to our American warfighters and to our citizens if they're not making decisions based on real intelligence analysis and really real foreign policy expertise.
Well, Congressman, there was, as we know, a pretty long wish list from the Saudis for today, and they did get, at least we know, the F-35 package they wanted. They're also in talks around the chips, as we mentioned, civil nuclear energy, that sort of thing. It does seem a lot was asked for and a lot was granted, whereas on the U.S. side, it's a little unclear. Beyond that $600 billion that's supposed to become $1 trillion, what is the U.S. side getting? Can you kind of unpack, from either side, did somebody win this negotiation? And if so, what is the loss on the other side of the ledger?
I don't think the American people won this at all. I think Saudi won, but I think if you see the people that won, you wonder what the cascading business effects are for the Trump family and those around them. I think that's the first thing you would look at as an analyst. What is the win? Is it lower oil prices? What does that do, sort of economically for the larger oil and processing companies in our country? I think that's what you look at. Michelle, your question on the F-35 is one that bothers me. As a United States Air Force intelligence officer, my expertise were fighter jets. I was trained on intelligence on F-15s and F-16s, and then the supersonic bomber, the B-1. And that's after 9/11. I deployed 10 days after 9/11, so this is a subject that does get to me. Is that, for instance, if the Russians had signed a deal in 21 or 22 to deliver Pantsers, which the NATO designator is the SA-22, it's a surface-to-air missile system, does multi-layer defense with missiles and guns. People can look it up. You can Google it right now. Just Google the SA-22 Greyhound. But those are unclassified things that you're seeing, even the weaknesses. And my big fear, Michelle, is that if we're providing F-35s, are they utilizing F-35s in practice runs against the Pantser or the SA-22? And what are the Russians learning about our weapon systems? Also, we don't know what the technology transfer looks like in the Middle East specifically, right? We don't know if those Blackwell chips are going to find their way into other hands, which was something we worried about with China and other Middle Eastern countries. And again, I just feel like we're not looking at this in a way that benefits the American people. It's a specific portion of those at the top of the government that look like they're trade dealing outside of what's good for America. And again, I wonder what the Republican side of Congress is going to do after they're screaming about Sharia law or about, the sort of Muslims, creeping into our country's infrastructure, the scary thing, right, Joe and Michelle? So I think, again, we have to be very, very careful when you don't have real decisions from professionals and you're doing this for personal gain or for other gains we can't see. What does that do to our war fighters in the future, and what does it do to our geopolitical standing in the future also?
That is a scary scenario that you outline, Denver, and we need to pull you into some deep waters with regard to what's happening in the House today. I'd love to know what you're hearing from your former colleagues, if you believe as well that this discharge petition to release the Epstein files will receive a unanimous vote. And if you're also part of the chattering class now in Washington who says it won't matter because the DOJ has an ongoing investigation into the likes of Bill Clinton and other Democrats that will make it impossible for them to release any Epstein files. How are you looking at this?
You know, the best way for a squid to escape is to squirt a lot of ink. Right, Joe and Michelle? And I think,
like that.
You know, so I think what you're saying is a massive amount of ink squirting going on in Congress right now. And for me, you know, when you're talking about redactions, when you're talking about what kind of executive privilege he's going to invoke, when you're talking about the legal challenges, when you're talking about what this vote signifies, it's pretty interesting that they've had about 10 months to get their act together after they said they were going to release the Epstein files on day one. You guys remember the phase one binders, right? And the giddy influencers coming out with obviously empty binders. At this point, you know, I mean, it's mind-boggling that the sane or the rational would think that's anything but performative theater that you're saying. And I do believe right now that I don't think we're ever going to see all the Epstein files as long as Trump is, you know, in place. I think anything that you see, you know, the far right's going to say, no big deal, and the center and the far left's going to say, my Lord, what have we just seen here? I think we just have a bunch of ink squirting going on right now.
Well, Congressman, you wouldn't know it from today's events and how they've been pitched by the White House and the focus on the Saudi deal here. But, you know, the White House has been trying to get back to affordability as a message. So amid affordability, we've got MBS this week. We've got Venezuela cooking hot, which we've forgotten about almost this morning. All of these issues, you've been to Ukraine many times. I wonder if you fear that that issue will kind of fall by the wayside, that we're not having our eye on the ball in terms of what do we do next here. Certainly on President Trump's mind as the last war that he wants to solve, as he often says, and he's losing patience. But where do things go from here on the Ukraine front?
Oh, goodness. That's a great question. My gosh. But that is a great question. You know, as you know, I was just in Ukraine recently, incredible memory, and I'm about to go back, right, in the next few months. And I was just talking about Ukraine today. I think Ukraine does sort of fall by the wayside. I think I find it interesting that the Trump team stole affordability, the word, from the Spamberger campaign, who actually has a real plan here in Virginia, and all of a sudden they're grabbing onto her messaging that was successful. That's what I'm seeing right now when you're looking at the national landscape. But as far as Ukraine's concerned, Michelle, I'm very, very worried. I know it took them a long time to take Pokrovsk, you know, the Russians going in there, and obviously I get updates. I know a lot of people there. But I do think there's going to come a time, even with the advances in drone warfare, where Ukraine's going to have, you know, maybe some attrition problems. And I think, can they last through this administration? I hope they can. But I think at some point, the United States has to make that decision to arm them in a very, very huge way. And again, it goes back to the fact, I don't know if we're providing, again, F-35s, Michelle and Joe, to Saudi, and we're not worried about Russian equipment there. Are we not worried about Russian intervention or Russian incursions at all into neighboring countries? I mean, at what point after 10 months do we say, well, maybe the Trump administration just isn't that interested in what's going on in Ukraine based on whatever conspiracy theories or whatever foreign policy doctrine they've come up with?
Would Tomahawks make the difference, Denver? We talked about that up and down until the president decided it wasn't time to send those cruise missiles to Ukraine. And what if we did give them F-35s? Would be able to train Ukrainian pilots to make a difference?
Be rough. I mean, training F-35 pilots quickly would be very rough. I mean, they're some of the best pilots in the world. But I will tell you this. I mean, if there is a way, right, where we could use allied F-35s, that would be fantastic. Listen, Tomahawks would give the Russians a maximum pucker factor. I mean, that is just the truth. We are so much more armed, just more technological than the Russians on every way. They've shown themselves not to be effective in a large landmass war against Ukraine. Now, you got to give Ukraine credit. They're one of the most savvy opponents I think the Russians could imagine, based on the fact that they can change their tactics, techniques, and procedures on a dime. They have brilliant engineers over there, especially in drone warfare. But yeah, I think we're at a point right now that those type of arms like Tomahawks, I think it would give the Russians pause, because they really they wouldn't have much they could do against them. When you're talking about anything like that, when you talk about cruise missiles, or you're talking about Tomahawks, the Russians would not be happy about that. And again, I think we should have probably done that sooner rather than later.